we should hopefully go live any second. It seems we're live. So right now the trailer is playing. Oh, okay, the YouTube video is not live yet. There we are. Okay, right now the trailer of the game is playing, so we will be quiet for just a second, and after that we will get right into the stream.
Cool.
Okay, so the trailer is over. Hello everyone, hello internet, everyone who's joining us. This is Rebecca. You might know me from previous streams. I work for the publisher of Interrogation, and with me is one of the developers, David, who will introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm David. I've led the game design and narrative design for Interrogation, and I'm here to talk to Rebecca and all of you about any questions, curiosities, thoughts you may have.
Okay, so in case anyone has any questions, you can ask in the chat on Steam, on the Steam store page, and on YouTube as always, and also on Discord. I also have an eye on that. So today it's all about, it's our second behind the scenes stream, which is a terrible name. But yeah, so today, after talking about art last time, we will be talking about the writing. And it's not quite easy to write for a game like Interrogation, right? Like there's lots of choices, so.
Yeah, we knew we were setting ourselves up for something really hard and challenging, and that was part of what attracted us to the project. And yeah, there was so little conversation-made gameplay. Like visual novels do give you choices, and Interrogation gives you choices too. But especially writing gameable conversation was a big challenge. Other than the overall narrative and all the topics being studied, making gameable conversation was a very specific kind of challenge.
And the conversational system is a lot different than from other games. Like in other games, you have a list of options, and basically you can just click everything. But in Interrogation, as we've seen in the previous streams, that's not the case. What made you decide to go for such a different system?
We didn't like, we knew we wanted a conversational game. We knew we wanted a conversational game in which you can make mistakes and make good decisions as well, for the challenging version of it anyway. And we didn't decide that, for example, the navigation system we have right now is necessarily the one to go. We iterated through many different systems, and rested on the navigation one as a compromise. It's still not like ideal. It's not, doesn't have the naturalness of a real conversation to have to go back to a previous tree, but at least gives the player structure to know what topic they're on, and that sort of thing. And we decided to maintain that structure. That the gameplay challenge is conversational was the core concept since the game first came out of a one-day game jam, with what is today episode 2 of the game. What is today episode 2 of the game was three. What is today episode 3 of the game was the, in a much simpler form, the original game jam version.
Okay, so the game jam was under the topic under the surface, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so like it's quite it's when you know like the idea of interrogation, it's kind of obvious why it fits. But like, was this the first idea you had, or did you like go through several ideas?
Like we can be very pretentious. It's kind of in the company identity. Critique Gaming is a pretentious little company, but essentially, yeah, we knew we don't want to do the classical underground, underwater. We knew we wanted to go for a nuanced understanding, and really, that's like in a broader sense than just interrogation. That's our biggest mission to see how well we can do nuance in games, and as a learning mission to teach ourselves how to do nuance well in games, because games today, like as an industry, are really good at delivering raw fun. Some of them do engagement really well, some of them do emotional connection really well. uh, Not as much nuance in games as we'd like, um, and that's why we wanted to have nuance, especially in something like writing, as a key principle in what we create.
Okay, so I just remember that not everyone might be familiar with what a game jam is. It's basically you get together with other developers. There's a topic, like in this case, Under the Surface, and you develop a game in most of the time, I think, a weekend. So it's very little time to make a game, which is most of the time incredibly complex. And sometimes things continue and become big, huge games that end up on Steam, for example, like Interrogation. And yeah, so when you started out and you made the what is now episode 3, did you already like have some ideas about the bigger picture, uh, or like how did the huge overarching story develop?
To be quite honest, like at the game jam moment, no, there wasn't an overarching story. It was just the psychology of dealing with a terrorist. It wasn't more complex than that. It was just a game jam game. But when asking ourselves, fine, we have this cool gameplay we like, we have this cool way to interact with real psychologies we like, we know the game can have that as its core. What does it need to look at? And we simply looked, you definitely have to counter people doing evil to a subjective, nuanced, gray degree. Uh, what makes people do evil nowadays? And we found more often than I don't know, selfishness or greed, that a more interesting topic, at least, and very actual, very salient, was that people do evil considering they're doing good, convinced they're doing good, because they believe that evil will lead to good, and they don't even see it as evil to begin with, often enough. And we felt that's a cool person to interrogate. Anyone can interrogate the thief who wanted more resources, but talking to somebody with an ideological outlook is always a ride, and we wanted to show that.
Okay, so it's really interesting to see like how a small idea naturally grew bigger because the progression makes sense. It's quite, but at the same time amazing what became of the initial idea of Under the Surface. So you mentioned writing different characters and different ideologies. How did you approach writing all these different characters? Because they are from all walks of life and with different opinions and speech patterns, even.
There's lots of components that went into that. The characters were basically all defined before being cast to specific actors. So we already knew what our full cast of character is that we need narratively before casting any actor to these roles. And we looked at our available actors and then paired them with roles where appropriate. Um, so the concept of each character was before anybody came in, and their voice had to include elements specific to what you would today find in their case file. So they need to sound like their case file, and they need to respond to the things the case file suggests they would respond well to or badly to. But from there on, there were lots of points of nuances. For example, a significant influence on the voices of characters were their actors, although they were cast to these roles after we decided what characters will exist in the game. We had lots of the actors either because we knew them socially or during the actual shooting we would do little dialogue segments. We would explain the psychology of the character, and even though maybe they had like a less developed understanding of the character, they definitely all infuse their voice into the character during these little simulations of dialoguing with the character that we did during the shoots. So that was another layer that got added on. Sometimes we were informed by how the actor delivered that character in these little exercises.
So, so it was
Yeah,
probably very helpful as well that the people you cast as actors were actual real life actors who had
and
experience.
exactly. It helped us see what real people might sound like, uh, and as well, what helps a lot with that is just a lot of research and our background with looking at things like criminology and such items. We wanted to make sure that these people are credible in what typical ideologically radicalized people are, which is which are interesting when they are day-to-day people, because it's not like they wear a uniform. It's not like you see them on the street wearing something specific. They are day-to-day people, and the nice grocery store dad can be an awful terrorist, and the awful smelling punk rocker can be a perfectly loving, peaceful human being. Um, and we wanted to play with that, not directly. It's always not true, not directly. It's always true, but actually look at the nuances of all these people, with each of us being good and bad in various ways. I think I got off the question though. Remind me what the question was.
Uh, well, I just kind of it wasn't a real question. I just noted that it was good
Yeah.
having actors. So, um,
All right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I was
Um,
doing layer because there were more layers than that. Like other than the original character concepting, then the actor voice, then the nuancing. Um, we also looked at because after just adding these layers that I just mentioned, we often sometimes got conversations that were a little too casual. And we had to, at many points, step back and realize, look, this might be what this character is, how this character talks to you if you visit them socially, but they are right now in an interrogation room talking about potential terrorist accusations and a terrorist situation. That is not a typical situation. You don't talk like yourself. If you or me were brought into a precinct, into an interrogation room, we would not talk like we do on stream. There would be different nuances to how we relate, and that was another layer we had to be careful about uh, to the degree that we can, making them feel like realistic people in that situation that they're in the game.
mhm. And you also in every interrogation, the player can use different routes, right? You can be very nice and empathetic and friendly and kind of like be soft with the people you interrogate, or you can go really aggressive and hard and accuse them, even insult them. So you probably also like had to concept different reactions there. How did you like? Obviously, you can't just sit down and like write a book because there's different player choices that they can take and different emotions a person can be in, and this will obviously influence not just the question you asked right now, but questions that come after that. So you probably, I guess, you probably didn't just use a Word document and type everything down. So how
No.
did you approach that?
So our wonderful lead dev, Marius, gave us a tool. I'm not a programmer, though I do game design. I'm not well versed in programming. And he made us a wonderful tool that us mere mortals can use easily. We have an editor within which we were able to program the questions with their effects, with how things navigate between the pages, setting the flags of what you found out, what you haven't found out, and all of these things. And that tool was key to making interrogation. It allowed us to uh, program without programming, level design, as it were, these conversational levels without coding.
Hmm. But did you like write the actual text in there as well, or did you do that somewhere else? How did you keep track which player choices affect what? And there's a lot of minutiae there, right?
Absolutely. So there's lots of layers to that. The game tracks almost 20 different stats numerically, all sorts of things, from what's obvious, like agent motivation, to more subtle things, such as little political and ethical choices you make, and that might have something to do with what end game choices you receive once you reach the end. All sorts of things being tracked numerically, as well as flags about information you have or don't have, or states you've put the player in other than just emphatic or fearful or not. And that's done through setting flags. It being said that, yes, this character B has revealed information X to you, because that flag is set. Now, when you go to character A and approach the same menu about the same topic, you will be able to also follow up that information because it also involved character A. Look, and ask the question, look, character B said this happened. What do you say? And that's all just grinding level design work, just making sure all that information is coherent.
Yeah. So we have a question from the chat. Corey asked, "Does the editor look like a chart or branches?"
Neither, neither. Closer to a chart, I guess, but it's really custom made for exactly what we needed, which includes navigation on one side, navigation between the pages, and then question programming and defining the traits of the question, stat modifications under that, and then a whole array of answers that conditionally come up in different circumstances.
So it's kind of
Uh,
more like it's actually kind of like a dialogue tree in the game, right? You except it
mhm.
shows you everything, every
Exactly.
question that comes before it. You just kind of like click through the topics and get to submenus where you can see everything.
Exactly. It mirrors that, except we have obviously all the available answers on screen. We just set when they're accessible or not. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a bit lighter. I've seen it, and it's white and
Yeah.
not black. Uh, which is kind of really funny because when I like work on assets for like a social media post or whatever, and like staring just at black and white for a long, long time, it just my eyes kind of go crazy after some time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, especially.
The game's universe is only meant for you to spend 8, 10 hours in it. It's not meant. It's not a good color. It's not a good chroma to live in.
Well, I'm like mostly talking about like making small images, small changes, and like getting things like pixel perfect. And like when playing, I have no problem. I've played for long hours and never had any issues. But if you're like trying to get everything just right and like, okay, do I like push this to the left, push it to the right?
Yeah.
I can. Yeah, sometimes it's.
Like
It's
if you would
hard.
have asked us when we started, we said we're doing noir, and that's easy because you don't have all the color complication.
Yeah.
That is not the case. Black and white is harder uh, because you have to make black and white deliver everything color does.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic of delivery, like Obviously the art does deliver a lot of the emotions because you got the actors and rotoscoped them, but the writing also had to deliver like a lot of emotion, and you went for a very specific approach with like the speech bubble. So can you maybe explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, the short answer is we're doing comic book style, and that's comic book style. The long answer is why are we doing comic book style? And we chose to go for comic book style because we felt it's a great middle way, middle spot between the player's imagination and what is given to you on screen. A movie gives you most of what you need to perceive. A book gives you very little of what you need to perceive. You're imagining it fully in your head, what things look like, sound like,
Hmm.
so on. We wanted to go for this middle point within which we clearly tell you, look, this character is doing this gesture. We'll show you in the animation. We'll show you on their face. We'll show you in the little reaction box. Uh, but your imagination should fill in the blanks, and we're happy with that. And we like that sort of art that engages you to create the reality you're looking at, that has these, let's call them symbolic elements, because realistically, if that conversation is really taking place, the characters are probably a little more animated than that, a little more varied. But all of that we trust the player to do because we think we're giving them enough atmosphere, enough signifiers of what this character's gestures and uh, aspect is like. Obviously the players have to imagine the character's voice in their head. We never say this character's voice is this sort of voice before you start talking to them. And we like that in comic books. That's exactly what comic books do. We knew that that's how the two fit well. That's how comic books work. They give you a degree of motion, they give you signals, but what happens in between the panels, what exactly is happening in that text bubble takes 4 seconds to read, but the image is frozen. So you're imagining that flow of time. We gave you a little more than a comic book does, but still wanted to leave room for the player's imagination, um, because that makes the experience more personal than watching the exact same movie everyone else is watching. Uh, makes it the player's own experience because they heard Daniel Wilson in one way, a different one perceived them in a different way.
Did you have like a case where you talked to a player after they played and they had a completely different impression of a character than you thought they would have or that was intended?
Well, again, short answer is there are really no intended perception of any of the characters. There's no character we intend you to hate or we intend you to love.
Or
Uh,
expected, more
that
likely.
that being said, yeah, virtually all characters have somebody that has them as their favorite. Characters that are sort of, let's say, more secondary. There are people whose favorite character is that more secondary character, and we've had characters that are highly more easily sympathizable, that some of the players find not, uh, that they dislike. They enjoy playing
Mm.
against them, but they dislike as a presence. And I think for us that was a check that we're achieving what we want to achieve with these characters, because that's how real people are perceived.
Mm.
The Hollywood perfectly clean superhero that everyone loves, who is perfect in every way, morally is funny, charismatic, flawless. Even their flaws are actual qualities. They're too loyal or too committed
Yeah.
or too just. Um, we don't want to do that sort of character. That's not what interrogation is about. We wanted to make realistic flawed characters, and realistic flawed characters get different reactions from different people, and that was therefore a check for us that uh, we got there, at least by that metric.
Can you mention your personal favorite character without spoiling anything?
Um, I'm not sure. I I'm not sure I can pick a favorite, as in I like that character or I like that character if they were a real person. But I
Okay, yeah.
do like there is a character whose presence I enjoy most in the game, and I will just say, and that's it's a spoiler check. It won't tell anything to players who don't know it, and will tell players who know it who that is. It's the character who you never see face to face. The character who you never see face to face was especially fun to write, especially because it had to completely lean on writing their voice as the core, as all of the character, that in some photos.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's really funny to like see the reaction of players to the characters, because I mentioned this in the stream where we actually played the second case where you have the burglar and the husband. I might have shown my personal bias against the husband, so like I made it very clear I dislike him, and I saw him and I was immediately like, okay, no, this guy is too polished, too smug. Like I don't like him. And like after a few sentences exchanged, I already was like, nah, he did it. He's the criminal.
I'm
And
getting you. Yeah?
and I've met players who looked at them and they were just like, the burglar did it, definitely. He's scum, he's aggressive. And I'm like, where did you get this? So it's really interesting to see the biases that people have like come into play. Uh,
That's all. That's also one of the level design writing principles we had when doing these. We wanted everybody to be suspectable, and in testing and in calibrating, that's what we got to. That there are various people in each interrogation episode that different people suspect. There's nobody that passes through the game without being suspected. Uh, and the game doesn't even give you final answers on some of the characters, whether you should have been suspecting them or not.
yeah, that's very hard for me sometimes because I also play a lot of games, duh. And most of the times you just get answers when you're done, right? Either you get the information straight when you make the decision, or you get it later on, but in a clear way. It tells you this decision made was good because this character was evil, uh, or the other way around. In interrogation, you really have to think for yourself and look inside yourself to see do you feel about your choices? Can you live with them? So I think that's very uh, valuable. Might not be traditional fun, but incredibly valuable as an experience. Um,
That if I may, that really brings us to a pretty important principle, which was that we always erred on the side of realism. We wanted the interrogation to have a simulation quality of realism, and that meant some sometimes unpopular choices for players who are used to saying, click this, you will get +1 empathy and +5 press approval. Don't click this will give you minus something. And in interrogation, that sort of thing is fully obscured, as well as all sorts of ethical choices and their consequences. And that's completely on purpose because what the game is studying is how hard all this is for real. Because real policemen, real authorities don't get this does +10 that or -5 that other thing, or this will have this consequence 4 months from now. They have to estimate all that by their own. Even when they sent some of the suspects home, maybe they send somebody guilty home. They never get, there's no interface to tell them, good job, they really were innocent, you decided correctly. They never get that confirmation, the real people having to really do this work. And that's part of what we're doing. And it's sometimes frustrating, but it's exactly what the game is trying to look at. And lots of people love and appreciate that in the game, that it gives that realistic frustration, and we wanted to have that in the writing as well.
don't get me wrong, I love it as well, but it's still super hard to
Yeah.
like get to accept to get to a level of acceptance. Like, okay, well, I won't ever know the right answer. Um, so when you were writing the game, to kind of like get back on the topic of the biases that naturally appear that every one of us has, how did you approach writing different characters that you might be biased towards personally?
Well, the writing team involved three of us. While I led things narratively and also did a good part of the writing, we have two other colleagues, Mihai and Andrei, who also leads production, also doing writing work on the game. So part of that diversity was to make sure that we look at these characters from even our own personal different vantages. So, for example, when we identified, look, we have these three socialist characters, we try to kind of each do one of the socialist characters so that we have at least a diversity of understanding of what that is, as well as each of the characters went through each of our hands. Any character that's in the game, all three of us looked at them and nuanced and calibrated them if we felt one of the others was going one direction. The three of us also happen to have a fairly wide spectrum of political outlooks between the three of us and just social outlooks on that sort of thing. Moreover than that, we looked at feedback a lot. Before launching the game, went to lots of shows where we had lots of trade fairs and conventions and that sort of thing, where we got to gauge people's reactions and we got to calibrate some things. If we repeatedly got feedback about a character that they're kind of cliche, kind of pushed too much into a trope, we would look at that and see if and how we can nuance them. Uh, and beyond that, another exercise that's easy for us as debaters is to just imagine what this looks like to other people, what other people would think of this character. To fill in background, lots of the critique gaming staff are former academic debaters, and academic debating is all about speaking in favor of the point of view you're given to defend, not the one you pick. So, doing debating, you're often uh, put to the task of defending something you might not believe in, but you still have to do the best defense you think can be made of that thing. So we're all of the writers are former debaters. So we're all well versed, at least in depicting other points of view that are natural to us. So that helped a lot with this.
So I guess it's kind of a bit unrelated to the game, but then again, might also be connected to the writing. When you do have to debate or in the game write a standpoint that is not your a opinion that is not your own, uh, do you feel that's maybe even easier because you've interacted with people who hold that opinion, or you've debated people who hold that opinion and know all the counter arguments yourself, and know what kind of flaws you would see in their argument and can address them? Or do you think it's easier to write somebody whose opinion is basically the same as yours? I hope this will
Uh,
make sense.
that makes perfect sense. What's hardest to write is your opinion. If a character happens to have your opinion, that's really hard to write. Uh, because how we function as a just a psychology of ideas and of beliefs, political beliefs are still psychologically speaking beliefs, is that we tend to take for granted the things we believe to be true. And we accept less explanation and less argumentation and less explanation for things we already agree with. While for something we disagree with, we know that's hard to believe. Let me build up a really good explanation for how that can be made believable. So it's really hard to make believable things you think are obvious, but that might not be to everyone.
Yeah, but I think it's an interesting insight because playing interrogation um, shows you if you really open up to the game, it shows you a lot of your own biases, of your own opinions, and you can re reevaluate them in front of like the background of the game story and what you experience there. And I think like writing it probably must be that experience, but like multiplied by 1,000. And it's really, I think it's really hard to write without letting your bias show. So being able to make a game that tries to be as unbiased as possible, I think it's quite impressive for a writing team, and especially with 3 people. That's not that big for how huge the game is.
Yep.
So like all in all, I think it's over 150,000 words. So that's a book. That's a
Yep.
lot of content. How long did it take you to write that? Like, can you estimate? Like, were you done like halfway through production, or like did you write until the very last day? And
uh, there were still things being written a couple of months before launch. So even though they were not core game things, there were still things being finalized a couple of months before launch. So yeah, like a big chunk, the vast majority of the 2 years included writing. Um, and part of that writing is not so much the quantity of it. Uh, it's putting all that quantity into a gameable system. If we were just writing
mm-hmm.
pages of linear dialogue, that would have been so much easier. Uh, Making it interactive and conditional, and to try to make it as natural as we can in those conditions was the big hard thing. And it's really easy to face. We faced moments of writer's block.
mm.
Our main tool against writer's block was to pass it off to a different writer when you're stuck, to do everything you can do. But if something is stumping you, pass it off to the next writer, and we would do rotations of the segments we were working on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it's easy to feel daunted when you have a whole new character or even whole new episode ahead of you. That can be really daunting, and getting past that is hard. Uh, it's notorious how the first page of any book is hardest to write.
Mm.
And it's the same with any chapter of interrogation with the episodes. Those were hard to get going.
So when you started working on the whole game, did you develop a overarching story first, or did you work on a few episodes and kind of, or characters even, and like kind of see what story they have to tell and where they fit in?
So one thing we knew was that we have the skeleton of that what would become episode 3, and we knew that would get slotted in someplace. That was one thing we knew. But other than that, we sat down and built the full narrative beats of the entire story. So first we plotted the overall story of the Liberation Front and what happens in the players' interaction with the Liberation Front, how they can achieve uh, victory, as it were, uh, in that encounter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's multiple stories we need to tell at the same time, interweaving. It's the stories of the characters you're interacting with. It's the story of you, the lead detective, the story of your staff, the story. And there's two different stories. There's the story of the Liberation Front itself, and the story of society interacting with the Liberation Front. I won't get into spoilers, but how that society relates to the Liberation Front is a big part of what's being looked at. So yeah, first we did the overall grand narrative, as it were. We knew what all the narrative beats we want to hit throughout the game are, um, and then got into design of individual episodes.
Just to make sure, narrative beats are like plot points, basically, like checkpoints
Mm-hmm,
in the plot.
mm-hmm,
Okay.
mm-hmm.
It's sometimes easy to get lost in the lingo.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, okay, so you basically had like a few uh, marks that you wanted to hit, and then worked on developing the story of the people, the characters involved in the story. And when
I,
it came,
I,
hmm?
it was actually like more takes than that, in the sense that we did narrative beats. Actually, it's even a wider thing than plot points. It's the narrative beats are, like, I guess, the overall big themes of each segment of the
Mm.
game you're hitting. Then you go down into broad plot, then you go into micro plot, then you go into the episodes, and only then did we go into characters. After we knew uh, everything this episode needs to do, needs to achieve, then we get into the characters. Because the trick about that is lots of the episodes set up and elevate things going on in other episodes, future episodes, or putting in a new light things that happen in past episodes. So making sure we know the full sequence was important. We didn't want you to get into a character, do it in a way, but then say, wait a second, we need to foreshadow that. We need to link it back to that. We wanted the writer starting on that character to know everything that character has to be linked to in the future, in the past, what they need to be connected to, which is why we started from big to small.
I think a lot of game development studios have something called a story bible, like a huge document that holds all of this information. Did you have something like that as well? Because that's a lot to keep track of, right?
We had something like that. We had a narrative index document talking about the broad beats, but we were not highly disciplined with it, uh, in the sense that I would figure out some other segment that hadn't yet been figured out what I think we should do with it. I would pitch it to the rest of the team. They would give me pointers if they think something can be done better in a different way. I'd integrate that or discuss that, and then we'd put it in. And sometimes we'd be smart enough to put it in a document. Sometimes it would just remain in our collective uh, memory, and sometimes it would get lost from our collective memory, although we discussed it. Yeah, discipline is good. We had some of it. You can always have more.
Game development is a wild ride. So I can't fault you there.
Yeah.
um, so most of it was written in the editor that was basically like a dialogue tree, and in your head, did you ever like have a point where you like felt overwhelmed with everything and like, oh my god, what did we do? Why did we decide to make the story so complex and so many choices?
The three of us have different we've had to talk a lot about what our process is in writing these episodes, and each of us has kind of a different process. For example, if we're facing an episode, even if that episode we know what its core gameplay is, what its characters are like, we have pretty different approaches to doing an episode. For example, uh, Dexter Andre has to get writing, see what that writing is like, and from there uh, write a schematic of what the episode uh, is fully going to be like in terms of its steps, then go back into crunching it down. Mihai, for example, has to have the character's voice in head, and then everything else can happen. Has to have the characters talking in a way that he found credible, and then the rest would flow. I tend to fully mentally plot everything I want in the episode, and only afterwards get typing when I feel I have a full understanding of everything that's going to be in it, so that the first word I put in falls into that big picture. And none of these are wrong, and we've had to like adapt to these different styles, but they're also a major strength because they give us a diversity of episodes uh, that we're happy with, that a single writer probably couldn't have achieved.
Hmm. When finding the voice for a character, English is not your native language.
Mm-hmm.
So you're writing all these different kinds of characters with all these different speech patterns and sometimes using slang, all of that in a language that is not your native language. How did you approach that? Like, did you watch movies or read other books for inspiration? And, or how do you find so many different voices?
There's lots of answers to that. What helped was that we have various forms of expertise that help us with voice building. Debating, for example, is part of that. creating voices to defend different points of view helps to a degree. Another part is that, for example, I do improvisational theater, and doing different characters is part of that discipline as well. Um, and additionally, just being writers, we look at media, we look at movies, we look at the books we read, the audiobooks we listen to, the games we look at too, and we're always looking at, here's how we did this, here's how we did this old mentor in this game really feels like somebody I can look up to. How did they create this emotional effect in me? I am looking up to this character as a mentor. How did they achieve that? How did they make this character credible as a mentor? They did this in the art, and they did this in the way he talks, and they did this in how they mentioned his backstory. And once you deconstruct that, and it sounds like, when I say it out loud, it might sound complex, but it's not. It's a 20-second thought when you're looking at a character. If you have a lot of those, it's just a form of self-education about writing. A writer got me feeling this, got me thinking this, rather than the typical reader who just says, "Cool, I thought that. Cool, I felt that." Stop for a second and ask, "How did they achieve that?" And deconstruct it mentally. Put it in your toolbox. Maybe you can pull it off yourself when you need to.
So did you three have writing experience before, or did you? It was it just a hobby?
No professional writing experience as such, but we've all been in fields where writing was a big component. From just other jobs in things like corporate settings or training settings, or I used to, for example, design um, corporate team building games that also would use characters in all sorts of contexts, to hobby writing, as well as lots of tabletop play. We also play a lot of tabletop games in which, like Dungeons and Dragons, but not necessarily just Dungeons and Dragons, many other games, in which a storyteller sits with the players. And the storyteller is the world. They tell the players what they find, and the players do the characters. That's also a form of educating how to build characters and practicing it, because the players can deep dive on a character. They always play uh, Guk the Barbarian, and they get to study Guk the Barbarian for the 40 hours of that campaign, and what Guk is like, and what he reacts to, and what his peeves are. The storyteller, even more so. The storyteller has to think of cultures, contexts, worlds, dozens of characters, and what their voices are. And that's also a great exercise for writing voices.
When you play tabletop games, do you are you the storyteller or are you a regular player, or do you switch?
I tend to be the storyteller more often, but I also sometimes play in the other's storyteller.
Because it's probably quite similar to writing a game in the way that you have to interact with your players and they will not do what you want them to do a lot of the times. So, except for in a game, you can just kind of like put an invisible wall somewhere and just say, you can't go there, believe me.
Yeah.
While, like, in tabletop, you have to kind of spontaneously react. So I think that's also, yeah, very good practice, probably.
Absolutely, and what the amazing thing is if you play a lot of these campaigns, you will soon find out that it's sort of a bad idea to decide what you think will be important characters and what won't be important characters. A very important noble that you want to be essential to the party's success, they might completely ignore, go past, uh, consider unimportant, while a throwaway NPC that just comes and begs for some money and talks about their tragic past might become the heart and soul of that campaign, their core motivation, their friend that they're doing everything for. Uh, and that's an important lesson for that was an important lesson for us in telling us that it's not just heroes or important people that can be important characters. An important character can be somebody that seems mundane at first, but all of us actually have depth, however mundane we might seem.
That's very inspirational. It's I almost feel like this might even be a good point to stop, but then again, I there's also a lot to talk about still. Um, so this is like the call for the chat. If you have any questions that you want to ask and get answered right now, it's a one-time chance. It's the last stream that we do this year before we disappear into the holidays. So ask right now. And if you want to ask any other questions, the developers of Interrogation are also on our Discord server. You can find that at discord.gg/mixtvision, M-I-X-T vision. And you can go there, join, and just talk to other players and talk to the developers directly. And we try to answer questions there. We have no last question from the chat. I want to give them like a few seconds. So,
Sure.
Okay, is there anything that you wrote for the game that didn't make it into the final game that you would have absolutely loved if it was in there, that you were very sad to cut?
That's hard to say. There are things that I have the intuition might have been good, but we couldn't get into the game. But uh, when looking at the episodes we did do, those intuitions can be wrong. Episodes we felt are more there for structural reasons to set things up and do certain gameplay things turned out to be very valuable and important narratively and very loved by players. While episodes we thought this one might be the funnest in the world is not sometimes are not necessarily that fun, but more rather important and relevant, but segues between narrative points. Um, so you really get to know what any major piece of writing is more rather after you start writing it. I mean, I've heard of these amazing writers that have a perfect image of what they want to do and deliver exactly that, but typically you discover what it is along the way. So yeah, we have some cool ideas, but a cool idea can end up in a bad final, in an unimpressive final product. And a bad idea, well done, can totally be something important with what it gains along the way.
Definitely. I think it's always interesting what gets left on the cutting room floor in games because there's oftentimes such a mountain of content that they tried and just didn't make it for one reason or another. We got a question from the chat. What is it like playing in other games? I guess it's probably related to the tabletop games, because we talked about you being a storyteller, and what's it like being a player for you? Like, do you also analyze everything?
Um, it depends. It to overanalyze as a writer storyteller that ends up a player is one of the risks. You might overanalyze and look at the game design instead of enjoying things, or look at the characters and that could have been done a little better, or even tunnel vision on your own character. That can be a bad thing.
Mhm.
Uh, Overthinking Grok's very complicated episode in his youth when a goose attacked him uh, cannot be the best idea. Although it sounds like, I'm enriching backstory, that's a good thing. You really have to remember to enjoy things as a player when you're playing. Uh, but ultimately, like if you want to make any degree of a profession from it, you have to take the opportunities of extracting lessons from the content you look at.
But you can still play without, like, you can turn your inner writer and game designer off and just enjoy still.
It's sometimes hard to, but it can be done. Yeah.
Yeah, that's because when I studied game development, a lot of my friends said I can't ever play games again as I did before, because they just couldn't turn it off. The voice in their head that was always working, always analyzing. Um, we have two extra questions. Have you had a player do chaotic things? I have destroyed one campaign due to my storyteller letting me. So not
Well,
entirely related to the game, but I think it's still interesting.
it is interesting, and it is sort of also related to the game. Um, like in an ideal world, rather than giving you a game, we would give each player their personal storyteller that can totally adapt and improvise for the player and manage their chaos. When doing a computer game, it's really hard to give that degree of freedom because the more freedom you give, the more you need to produce content for. And even open world games that sort of their objective is that struggle with that. Making an open world that doesn't feel repetitive and textured is a huge challenge, and it takes giant teams to pull it off, even remotely well. Um, that said, we wanted to give players not that full freedom because we just can't, but do give them room for varied self-expression. Uh, we wanted each player's playthrough to be a playthrough that probably no other player did exactly that way, with their own signatures and choices, and to have the variety of choices and nuances that lets each player's run be their own. Uh, Interrogation is a game in which you can lose or fail to advance. Uh, but in a sense, those timelines in which you failed, and as a player, you probably rewind and try again. But those timelines in which you failed are extremely interesting. Like, obviously, in one parallel reality, the game continues with your failure and its consequences. Um, and that's sometimes a good story in itself. The story of how I failed an interrogation, the story of how I got fired after this many episodes, is also often an interesting story. Just like the story of how a player might chaotically wreck a storyteller's tabletop campaign. Uh, some of my favorite games, some of my favorite gameplay runs are about how magnificently I lost in other games.
Um, yeah, absolutely agree. Another question we have you heard of Extra Life? I think that's a fundraising organization. So
Yeah,
I have heard of it.
yeah, me too. Yeah, what they do is really cool. They use the medium that is tabletop play and how entertaining tabletop play is to fundraise for worthy causes.
Yeah, it's quite impressive to see how much good the gaming community is doing, be it Extra Life or Games Done Quick, who do, I think, bi-yearly. No, they do like two live streams, I think, a year or even more. It's quite amazing to see how much uh, positive forces they have. And kind of a related question: can you use interrogation in an educational setting? And I've actually heard that before, and also wondered about it myself.
So we've tried to keep it highly realistic to the degree that a game of its length can be. Um, we've done it with criminology and psychology, studied to an extent to get that realism. Uh, and we've had professionals of these field try the game and say that it's an interesting as an education tool for those sorts of fields. That being said, I myself don't have the qualification to say it can be used educationally. It definitely has that potential. Definitely more than I don't know a movie uh, or some boring book. Uh, but obviously, only a qualified educator of those fields could say yes. I would have my students learn from this.
I think what might be interesting is to play it the game in school, like not necessarily to learn interrogation techniques or anything, but to just also look at different ideologies and look at how radicalization works. So I think, and like discussing it in class with the teacher, I think might also be very, very interesting.
As we were working on a game, we've had a focus group of people with various academic backgrounds, sociologists, psychologists, people that worked with ideology as their job, and so on and so forth. And all of the game was passed through this focus group. We mainly wanted to do that because we wanted that focus group to bash the game and tell us that it's hot garbage and how we can fix it. Uh, but essentially, that focus group was one of the most positive receivers of the game. They highly loved it. They did have some notes for us that we did integrate in the game, but essentially, they loved the game and that such a game exists. And it was encouraging for us to see how well they received it. Essentially, people that do work in these fields grok the game really well.
Yeah, I think it's a huge chance, and like education is constantly changing with all the new technology that's being developed. So why not have a game be part of your curriculum? So
Absolutely.
yeah. So we've been streaming for an hour now. I think we've been talking lots and lots and lots, and got a lot of questions as well. So I think it's time for us to say good night and run off into the holidays. um, because unfortunately, this is the last stream for this year. But we do have a little gift for you, um, our dear viewers, because we are not saying bye without giving you a little something. And I think it's really, really awesome what we're doing to like praise ourselves, because the lovely developers of Critique Gaming uh, have agreed to offer 3 lucky people to get a custom drawn avatar, like a profile picture drawn from their image. So we are doing a giveaway for an avatar in the style of Interrogation, uh, and it's running because we have 3 winners, and we are now 3 weeks after release. It's also running for 3 weeks. I will post the info on social media in a moment after we end the stream, but you have like the exclusive info, so you can already think about our little question, because to enter, you will have to comment on either the Facebook or Twitter post that I will make in a moment, which which fictional agent, police detective, you like the most. We have 3 agents in the game that we've already talked about, and you can also pick anyone else that you like to enter. And then in 3 weeks, on January 10th next year, we will choose 3 winners. So I think that's quite amazing as a send off from our last live stream. I'm very excited and very sad that I cannot participate myself. Because I'm sure the profile pictures will look amazing. So keep an eye out for our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and yeah, join our Discord, talk to us, enjoy your time. David, you have the last word.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your holidays. Make use of them to slow down, calm down, and be thoughtful about important things. And we will see you next year. Interrogations at your disposal if you need a little slow burn story during those quiet holiday afternoons. And we'll see you next year. We have many other things coming, but see you then.
Bye bye.